So let's use the same table here. So for this part here, I'm going to suggest the fixed version. And then exercise for you is to finish the tracing table. And then I'll give you some notes afterwards, okay, for you to compare. Okay, right here. So now the fixed loop invariance will be here. That's the final one. So the fixed loop invariance will be for every j, okay, 0 less than or equal to j. You can either say strictly less than I, okay, implies A, okay, that's a result, larger than or equal to A, J. Alternatively, this part here, you can also say less than or equal to I minus 1. Okay, you can go either way. Okay, and your exercise is to show that this loop invariant is appropriate. Okay, so exercise. Show this loop invariance is appropriate. Number one, it is established. Number two, it is maintained. And you can use the tracing table. Okay, trace table to do it. All right, that's good. I'll leave that exercise for you. So when I post the notes, I'll give you another annotation version of my notes, so you can also compare. All right. Okay, final time, final bit. Let's say we skip the break. I'll do another one, just a few minutes, and then we're done for today. Okay, you can ask me questions later if you want to. The final bit is to say, given our precondition, postcondition, and also the loop invariance. So now, what we want to do is, we want to finally show this algorithm is actually correct, right? That's what we want to do. So if you remember the condition we set earlier in the lecture, anybody recall? How do we relate the, okay, let me highlight the condition you should really refer to. We got this condition here, which we call B, right? And also we got our loop invariance right here, and also right here. And also we got our postcondition as well, right? Right here, okay? In this case, we also have our precondition, okay? Precondition sometimes can be useful as well. How do we relate them, right? There should be a formal relation we have to somehow show, all right? Anybody remember what that should be in general from lecture? June, do you remember? Do you remember? No. Okay, sure. Let's not do it right here. I'll remind you. So here, so what we said in the class was, given that we already exit from the loop, that means the B condition here is not true anymore, right? And also given that the loop invariance has been maintained from the last iteration, right? So this one means we exit from the loop. And this loop invariant here is really maintained from the last iteration. In the last iteration, okay? And given that, we should have until the post condition, basically. All right? That's what we have. Yeah, the precondition here in some way is not very useful in this case because this is already the last iteration, and this precondition is only true at the very beginning of the loop. So it may have already been falsified sometimes, right? So you don't have to include the precondition. That's my point. Okay, only this one here. Right? There's a very important relation for you to remember. Okay, right here. Right. So let's now try to write down this case. Right. Let's do it together. Right. So since you haven't seen many examples so far. Okay. So I don't need this anymore. Okay, let's just put it here. Okay, that's a general connection. Okay, of course, this one here is our post condition. Let's try. So what we have is, first of all, let's start with the not the case, we're staying in the loop. So I not equal to a dot length. Okay, and we know that the looping variance is the case for every j, 0 less than or equal to j, let's say, less than I. Okay, implies result should be larger than or equal to a j. Right? This one here is the B right here. And this is a condition that we check for establishment and maintenance in the previous 2 pages. And these two should entail the post condition, which we also did at the first page. For every j, 0 less than or equal to j, less than a dot length, implies result larger than or equal to aj. All right? Okay, pause for a moment. Number one, convince yourself every part is something we said already, right? Just make sure I didn't copy anything wrong. Number one. Number two, do you think this implication is true, trivially, somehow? That's the second question, right? Anybody would like to give a try to see why we can say this implication is trivial, trivially true? If you recall back in 1090, or maybe your previous math course, there's one proof method called assuming the antecedents. Have you heard about it before? Huh? Oh, you forgot. Okay, maybe it's a long while ago. That's okay. I wouldn't blame you for that. That's okay. So whenever you want to prove an implication here, one proof method is called assuming the antecedents. Okay, assuming the antecedents. Yeah, that's a proof method. Okay, so so we know that this is antecedents and this is a consequence, right? Implication terminology, right? In order to really prove that this implication is true, I can assume the blue part, which is the antecedents, and use whatever I have over there and show that this is the case. Josh, you got something?
Can't we just assume that it's I equals a dot length, that I equals a dot length, and we can just sub it into?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right? Gotta be, yeah, exactly, right? So when we say assuming the antecedents, we basically assume here and we assume here. And once we have done the substitution, we got exactly this. Right? Okay, let's do it. Okay, let's be careful. Okay, so you can say this is antecedents number 1. Okay, this is antecedents number 2. So we assume A1, A2. Okay, in that case, we know that from A1, now you can see the advantage of writing the condition here this way, because somehow we made it very straightforward in terms of its negation, right? What's the negation of not equal to? Well, equal to, right? From that, we know that I is exactly equal to a dot length at the end of the iteration. Exactly. It's like a largest index plus 1, right? After the plus 1, the last iteration. And then, so from A1, okay? And then we can substitute, okay? So think about number 1, number 2, number 3, substitute I by a dot length in A2. Okay, so basically we are substituting the I here. There's only one occurrence of I right here, substituted by A.length. And we got exactly the consequence we want to prove. Exactly. All right. So that one would be this gives us the consequence to prove. Okay, sorry, a little bit messy here, but I'll read it to you. So you substitute I by A.length, because we know from A1, I will be just the length of A. And then once you have done the substitution over here by A.length, this guy here is exactly identical to this one here. That's what we got. All right? Okay. So this will give us the consequence that we want to prove. Right? That's how we show. Okay. Of course, this one somehow is only a tutorial example. So I somehow made this one rather simple and straightforward. I think that you have to follow a similar pattern. In the test work exam, if somehow, even after the substitution, it may not be exactly the same, you have to do some additional arguments. So that will rely on your logical reasoning skill. Okay? But I think that this one gives you a very good big picture about what you should really do. All right, let me do a recap, and then we're done. Okay? So today we kind of did a very complete workflow about the loop invariance. Okay? So we started with this particular iterative algorithm using a while loop. So we start by specifying the input constraint and also the relationship between the input and output, and also known as the post condition. That's what we start with. And in this particular case, we consider the post condition here, especially the upper bound for the loop counter. So this one here can somehow be made a little bit more specific to the loop counter that kind of show that we want this progression of the loop to be reflected in the actual post condition. That will make the loop invariance to be specified, right? And then that's what we got as a loop invariant. This is the first proposal. And if you're given some arbitrary proposal for loop invariance, you ought to judge by checking that for establishment before the very first iteration, and also maintenance between the at the end of each iteration by using a table.
Sorry, I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So confused why the loop invariant is not maintained in the second interval or the third iteration.
So yeah, so it's not maintained at the end of the second iteration. It's not maintained.
But it is because
It is not, because tell you why. Would you agree after the second iteration, the result remained to be 20?
I thought it's like the if statement's already been invalidated, right? So now the result is already 40.
No, it wouldn't be, because in the second iteration, index will be 1. Because we start with the index 0, right? So for the first iteration, we are only looking at this index. In the second iteration, we are only looking at this index. Do you see what I mean?
Except the third iteration or second?
No. Look at the code, right? So here, we start with I to be 0. Agree?
Yeah.
Okay? So in the first iteration, we are only looking at 0 index. And then we increment I by 1 at the end of the first iteration. So in the second iteration, we look at when I is 1. In that case, the result is not going to be replaced by 10. It still remain to be 20. It will only be updated to 40 in the third iteration. But by then, the loop invariant violation already occurred.
Because you assess the loop invariant after you...
Yes, so that's the definition for loop invariant. Yes, that's really the essence for this loop invariant here. So you only check the loop invariance after everything has been done for that particular iteration, including I being incremented for the next iteration.
I think the if statement's already been invalidated, so now your result should be 40.
Okay, in the second iteration, do you agree? I value is 1.
Yeah.
Agree? So when you get to here for the second iteration, AI is 10. In which case, 10 larger than the result, 20 is false. So you don't really update it. So result remains to be 20.
Yeah.
And then you increment I from 1 to 2.
Yeah.
But result is still 20. And then you check the looping variance. Why don't you maybe come to me, that's okay, or just watch that part of when I explain the trace table. It's very important, right? Okay, then maybe we can go over it again. Okay, Josh, go ahead.
Did we end up deciding what the actual LI was supposed to be?
The actual looping variance?
Invariant?
Yeah, so this one is, this one here, you can see the condition there for the upper bound is actually not right. Because this one here, less than or equal to is not right. So it's going to cause some looping variant violation right here. So this one will be correct, and that'll be exercise for you to verify.
Well, that was more my question, because I was thinking.
Well, so what's your question?
Doesn't this break because our initial LI assert will fail because you can't have a value of j that is equal to 0 but also less than 0?
No. So when you first check this one here, I will be just 0. Okay, so let me do it again. This is a looping variant, right?
Well, because it's 0 less than or equal to j less than I. But if I is 0, then j has to be a value that's greater than or equal to 0.
Okay, so, okay, you're talking about this point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, we agree that I will be 0. Okay, so now, j is between 0 and 0 inclusively. J value can only be 0.
But
The fixed version.
there's a fixed version is it's not less.
Oh, no, okay, let's talk about this version here, right? Oh, I know where you want to go to.
That's what I was asking.
Okay, so are you asking about this version here or the fixed version? Fixed version, okay, good. I want to be sure, okay? You're asking about, in the fixed version, why this will be established, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm glad you asked. Okay, I don't mind talking about this one specifically. Okay. Okay. Right here. And we talk about this one here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I know exactly what you might be wondering. For every j, 0 less than or equal to j, less than what value? 0. Okay, good. So far, so good. Implies result larger than or equal to a, j. Guys, are you following? Right? Well, I'm just doing replacement for the fixed looping variant. So now the question is, what should this evaluate to?
Or is it just we don't evaluate it because there isn't j that exists?
It's going to evaluate to something. It's going to evaluate to either true or false, basically. All right? So now the question is, this particular predicate here, is it going to evaluate to true or false? That's the main thing. And this does require your knowledge from the logic course.
Okay, it is going to evaluate the true because it's
How come? Why would it evaluate the true?
implication of the first part is false, so it doesn't matter.
All right. How about just this part here? We know that j is a number. Is there any number that can be larger than or equal to 0, but also less than 0 at the same time? Is it possible? No. So this part here basically can be simplified into false. And then from your logic course, when you say false implies P, any predicate there, proposition, it will be equivalent to true. All right? I'm glad you kind of asked because I did want to mention that at some point. Now is the point. So that's why this looping variant here is true trivially, just because you have no value to even evaluate, just like a false. So empty range will be just true automatically. All right? That's really your question, right? Good. Okay, awesome.